Warning, the 15 chemicals in your coffee that Europe banned. The lab report said clean. The chromatogram didn't. Acrylamide spiked mid-roast. Glyphosate showed up where it shouldn't. And the lot that cleared Houston, it got stopped cold in Antwerp. Your daily cup just failed a test you never see. Europe quietly tightened the tap. The US kept the faucet open. If you drink coffee, you're in this story. You drink this ritual every morning, so why is Europe saying no to chemicals your store sells without blinking? Here's the play. 15 chemicals, what Europe squeezed, what America shrugged at, who's hiding the leaks, and fixes you can actually use. Let's start with the rules. Why your coffee slips through here, not there. To understand why the same bag coasts through one port and gets flagged at another, you need the two mindsets that decide what's in your cup. Europe runs on the precautionary principle. If there's credible evidence of harm, they tighten early, then adjust. The US leans on proof of harm. Wait for stronger causal data, then regulate. That single split changes every step between farm and your mug. Here's how it looks on paper. The EU sets maximum residue levels, MRLs, for pesticide residues in coffee and thousands of other foods. Their hard limits apply to imports and domestic goods, and they're enforceable at the border. If a substance is banned in Europe and still shows up on a bean, default near zero MRLs kick in, essentially a practical ban. The US uses tolerances and guidance. Allowable levels are often higher, and enforcement tends to happen after the fact, not at the dock. Same molecules, different gates. Now zoom into a container crossing the Atlantic. In Houston, coffee moves under a system that treats contamination as adulteration if it's egregious, but relies on risk-based sampling and post-market checks. In Antwerp, inspectors compare lab results against EU MRLs and benchmark levels for heat-formed contaminants. If Chlorpyrifos residue sits above a near-zero default, the shipment doesn't get a warning. It doesn't enter the market. That's not a policy memo. That's a pallet going nowhere. And it's not just governments. Big European retailers layer private specifications on top of EU law. Their buyer codes can demand stricter pesticide screens, tighter mycotoxin thresholds, and hard caps on residues from decaffeination solvents, even if national law allows more. If you want shelf space, you hit those specs. Fail, and the container reroutes or gets destroyed. The US has private codes too, but they're looser, variable, and far less likely to function like a de facto border. The heat chemistry rules differ too. Acrylamide forms during roasting. Furan builds in sealed, oxygen-poor packages. Europe has published benchmark levels for acrylamide in foods, including coffee. That's not technically a legal limit, but it triggers mitigation. Roasters must show they've changed time, temperature profiles, or bean blends to hit lower levels. In the US, it's guidance and litigation whiplash left coffee exempt from California's Prop 65 warnings for acrylamide. So European roasters run roast curve notebooks and mitigation logs. American roasters might, but aren't forced to. Here's a simple human moment. A quality manager in Germany emails a US roaster. Your medium roast tastes great. Your acrylamide is 35% above our benchmark. Show us your mitigation plan by Friday. Meanwhile, the same roast is launching in 3 American grocery chains with clean on the label. Nothing illegal in either case, just 2 different systems defining safe enough. Pesticides tell the same story. Europe revoked approvals for some legacy actives, think Chlorpyrifos, based on neurodevelopmental concerns and set near-zero MRLs. Endosulfan, globally phased out with Europe pushing hard on enforcement. The US timeline shifted, paused, then shifted again. Result: a Brazilian lot with traces that are under US tolerance can be legally sold in one market and rejected in the other. The farmer might have sprayed months before harvest. The residue still rides the supply chain. Heavy metals, mycotoxins, and processing aids add more layers. Lead dust from old mill equipment, cadmium from fertilizers or volcanic soils. Europe sets maximum levels or monitors tightly. The US treats outliers as adulteration, but rarely sets commodity-specific caps. Ochratoxin A forms if drying is slow or storage is damp. Europe sets a number and checks at import. The US issues action levels and guidance. Processing aids, defoamers, anticaking agents, carriers face EU purity criteria and retailer audits. In the US, good manufacturing practice language leaves more discretion to processors, and disclosure can be thin. Packaging practices can flip results too. Furan is volatile, but trap it in a capsule or a tight can and it sticks around longer. European buyers push for degassing corridors, one-way valves, and rest periods before sealing. They audit nitrogen quality and leak rates. In the US, those are best practices, not consistently enforced expectations. The difference shows up in a lab, not a TV ad. Now, here's the detail that retools a brand's entire roast line later. A private label buyer in Northern Europe adds a single sentence to their coffee spec. Acrylamide mitigation measures documented, furan levels validated post-pack, post-transport. Not just factory gate numbers, post-transport, because compounds shift during shipping. Suddenly, a roaster's compliant at packing becomes non-compliant on arrival. And the fix isn't a label. It's a new roast curve, a longer rest, a different valve, and a freight plan that limits heat spikes. So why does your coffee slip through here? Not there. Because Europe builds safety nets into approval, import, and retail steps, and then makes suppliers prove they used them. The US leans on after-the-fact correction and broader tolerances. Neither system guarantees purity, but one catches more at the gate. Keep that frame in your head as we walk through the 15 chemicals. You'll see the pattern. Heat makes some, farms leave others, packaging traps a few, and audits, or the lack of them, decide what you drink. Let's start with the roast curve offender that quietly rides the middle of the dial. 1. Acrylamide, the roast curve trap. The first time a roaster hears the word acrylamide, it usually arrives with a lab report and a headache. Acrylamide isn't sprayed on farms. It forms when coffee beans hit heat. As sugars and amino acids react in the Maillard party that gives coffee its flavor, a side guest shows up, acrylamide peaking early to mid-roast, then slowly declining as the roast deepens. That curve matters because your favorite medium can be the sweet spot for both taste and trouble. Europe didn't wait for perfect certainty. Since 2018, they've published benchmark levels for acrylamide in coffee categories, roasted, instant, substitutes, and told operators to prove mitigation, not theoretical promises, real changes. That means documenting time, temperature profiles, adjusting bean selection, and logging every tweak. Inspectors can ask, show us what you changed and the result. If your numbers sit above the benchmark, you don't get fined by default. But you do get pushed to fix it, and retailers may refuse your lot until you do. In the US, there's guidance but no binding federal limit for acrylamide in coffee. California's Prop 65 created years of chaos, lawsuits, warning signs, exemptions, until coffee was eventually carved out of the warning requirement. The practical outcome: some American roasters track acrylamide and manage roast curves, many don't. A label that says clean can mean flavor cues and marketing, not a measured number that would satisfy a European buyer. Here, S what actually happens in a roast room. A head roaster runs test batches at incremental charge temperatures, 392 degrees F, 396 degrees F, 400 degrees F. They watch turning point and rate of rise, aiming for a balanced development time, say 20% of total roast to avoid baked flavors. On the cupping table, the 396 degrees F batch sings caramel, citrus, crisp finish. The lab sample comes back. Acrylamide exceeds the buyer's benchmark by 30%. The team has to lower the early heat load, stretch the mid-phase, or shift the blend toward beans with lower precursor levels. Sometimes a 1-minute extension in Maillard and a 3-degree lower end temperature brings the number down without flattening flavor. Sometimes it ruins the cup and they start over. Light to medium roasts tend to carry more acrylamide because the compound forms quickly during early browning and hasn't had time to degrade. Go very dark and acrylamide usually drops further, but so does nuance, and you risk other issues like higher bitterness and different heat-formed compounds. The real art is that mid-curve. Roaster notebooks become evidence. Date, batch ID, environmental temp, development percentage, bean density, water activity, end color on a spectrophotometer, and the resulting acrylamide number. European buyers love those logs. They show control, not hope. One American brand learned this the expensive way. To enter Germany, they sent their beloved house medium. The flavor passed, the acrylamide didn't. The buyer asked for a mitigation plan. The roaster shaved 5 seconds off drying, added 10 seconds to Maillard, lowered end temp 2 degrees, and rested beans 24 hours longer before packaging. New tests cleared the benchmark. On shelves, sales held. Some customers even preferred the cleaner cup, slightly rounder sweetness, less edge. The company rolled the changes across their line and quietly made that German spec the internal global standard. What should you do at home? You can't roast away acrylamide in your kitchen, but you can vote with your wallet. Ask brands if they measure acrylamide routinely and if they meet EU benchmarks. If they don't know, that's an answer. Consistent roast profiles beat hype. Small roasters who publish lab ranges or share mitigation steps are telling you they're doing the unglamorous work. If a bag says light roast and extra clean with no data, be skeptical. There's another lever: how coffee ages before it hits your brewer. Acrylamide forms during roasting and then slowly decreases with storage, but furan, a different heat-formed volatile, behaves in the opposite direction in sealed formats, which we'll get to next. For acrylamide specifically, resting beans in valved bags won't increase it. It may nudge it down. That's why some European specs reference both roast mitigation and post-pack verification after transport. Numbers can shift in a hot container. Roasters facing acrylamide often tweak upstream choices too. Certain origins and processing methods change precursor levels. Think amino acid profiles and sugars, so blend composition becomes a control knob. Higher density beans tolerate gentler early heat without stalling, which can lower the peak. Water activity in green coffee matters as well. Too wet or too dry can distort the curve and force aggressive heat that spikes acrylamide. Freight timing, humidity-controlled warehouses, and even maintenance on the burner and airflow path show up in the lab result as much as any recipe note. This is the moment to flag a common myth: darker is always safer. Not quite. Yes, very dark roasts often show lower acrylamide numbers, but you may trade one reduction for other compromises in flavor and potential compounds you don't want more of. The smarter path is a measured roast that avoids the early spike while preserving taste, then proof through testing. That's what Europe demands and what careful US roasters already do. You shouldn't have to be a chemist to drink coffee, but you can be the customer who emails a brand. Do your roasts meet EU acrylamide benchmarks? Can you share your latest range? The answer tells you everything about their process control. And once you've seen how heat builds this compound, you'll understand why Europe keeps a logbook and the US often keeps a slogan: if heat can build acrylamide in the drum, wait until you meet the runner that hides in sealed coffee and lingers in the cup. 2. Furan, the capsule problem. Here, S where the lab numbers flip the story. Furan doesn't come from fields. It shows up when heat rearranges sugars, amino acids, and lipids during roasting. It's volatile, wants to leave, but if you trap fresh grounds in oxygen-poor packaging, it lingers. That's why the same coffee brewed from a capsule can deliver higher furan exposure than the same beans brewed from rested whole beans. It's not the farm. It's the timeline between roast, grind, and seal. Europe has been watching this for years. Surveillance programs kept finding higher furan in canned and capsule formats, so buyers started nudging engineering, not marketing. They didn't slap labels on boxes, they asked for process. Roasters built degassing corridors, literal waiting periods that let beans vent CO2 and volatiles before grinding. Factories added one-way valves to bags and tuned vent windows so furan leaves, but aroma doesn't. Some capsule lines extended rest from 12 hours to 48 or even 72, then validated the drop with post-pack testing. The cup still tasted fresh. The lab number moved. In the US, there's no binding maximum for furan in coffee. Companies can point to general guidance, make voluntary tweaks, and call it a day. That's how you get the same capsule recipe sold on both continents with two different oversight cultures. European clients ask, what's your rest time? What's the oxygen ppm in the headspace? Show leak rates and nitrogen purity. American sellers brag about crema and origin notes. One measures the air inside the capsule, the other measures the vibes. Let's walk the production line. Freshly roasted beans are screaming with CO2 and trapped volatiles. If you grind and fill immediately, you lock those inside. Over the first days, furan migrates out of the grounds into the tiny air pocket above them. Pop the capsule, brew under pressure, and you deliver a portion of that directly into the cup. If the line waits, rested whole beans, open bins staging under controlled humidity, furan off gases before grinding. If the pack has proper valves or selective permeability films, more escapes after sealing. None of this is guesswork. It's time, temperature, oxygen, and materials. Engineers in Europe solved small things that matter. They widened purge windows, the time nitrogen flushes the capsule before sealing to push oxygen down and carry off volatiles. They switched lidding films to reduce inward oxygen transmission while allowing tiny outward diffusion. They tightened grinder thermal controls so grounds aren't overheated, which can spike volatile formation right before sealing. They even mapped rest ladders, 24, 36, 48 hours, sampling at each step, choosing the one that hits taste and Furan targets. It's boring, incremental work. It's also the difference between passing and failing a buyer audit. Here's a micro story you'll feel. A Capsule brand launched a new super fresh line with day of roast filling. The crema looked gorgeous. The French retailer said no, their lab saw elevated Furan. The fix wasn't flavor additives, it was time. They added a 36-hour rest, swapped to a better valve in their bagged format, and tightened leak specs on capsules from 3 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000. The next shipment cleared. The marketing didn't change, but the cup did. So what do you do at home? If you love capsules, look for makers who publish process, rest times, oxygen levels, packaging specs, or at least reference degassing and venting protocols. That signal means they're measuring the thing that matters. If you brew drip or pour over, buy whole beans in valved bags and give them a day or two post-roast. You'll lose a little peak aroma on day one, but you'll likely cut Furan. For pre-ground fans, shorter shelf lives and valved packaging help, though they can't beat whole bean rest. One practical lever lives in your machine settings. Lower brew temperatures slightly and avoid excessive pre-infusion in capsule systems that superheat headspace before flow. You'll reduce the early burst of volatiles into the first sip. With filter coffee, don't choke the bed. Overlong contact at high heat won't create more Furan, but it can concentrate what's already there in the first moments. A steady, moderate flow evens it out. Remember the buyer who added post-transport validation to their spec? Furan is why. Containers heat up, sealed goods sit. A lot that was fine at the plant can shift after 2 weeks at sea in a warm warehouse. European audits test on arrival. American retailers rarely do. That's how the same capsule passes here and stalls there. This isn't about fear of a molecule. It's about whether the line that filled your morning shot treated freshness like a chemistry problem or a slogan. If a brand can tell you their rest window, valve choice, and headspace oxygen, they've done the math. If they can't, the crema might be hiding more than bubbles. 3. Cafestol, the LDL elevator. We've been talking heat chemistry and packaging. Now we're shifting to something brewed right into your cup, coffee oils. Inside that glossy layer that floats on unfiltered coffee lives a compound called Cafestol, a diterpene that reliably nudges LDL cholesterol upward. It's not scandal bait. It's just consistent biology that Europe, especially the Nordics, has quietly integrated into guidance while the US mostly shrugs. Here's the stakes in plain terms. If you drink boiled coffee, French press, or metal-filtered brews every day, you're delivering more Cafestol to your bloodstream than if you drink paper-filtered drip, pour over, or instant. Over weeks, that can move your LDL number enough for your doctor to notice. We're not talking about caffeine jitters. We're talking the line on your lipid panel that decides whether you get a new prescription. What actually happens? Coffee oils carry Cafestol. Paper filters trap much of those oils. Metal filters, mesh cones, Turkish Ibrik, Scandinavian boiled coffee, and many mocha pots let more oils through. Espresso sits in the middle. It's pressurized and oily, but volumes are small. Instant coffee is typically low because the process strips oils. So brew method isn't just a taste choice, it's a Cafestol dial. In Northern Europe, countries with strong traditions of boiled and pressed coffee, public health messaging has long acknowledged this. Guidance is simple. If LDL is a concern, prefer paper-filtered coffee most days. You don't need to quit coffee, you just change the gate the oils have to pass through. No drama, no ban, just a practical lever. Retailers even design labels to nudge behavior. Best with paper filter. You don't see that line much on American shelves. Let's build a quick brew matrix. Highest Cafestol exposure, boiled coffee and unfiltered press, especially with long steep times. Close behind, metal mesh cones, reusable metal baskets, and some mocha pots that emulsify oils into the cup. Middle lane, espresso, short, concentrated, oily, but small shots generally cap exposure unless you're stacking 5 a day. Lower lane, paper filter methods like automatic drip, V60, Chemex, Kalida. Lowest, instant and paper-filtered cold brew, which pulls less oil when filtered thoroughly. That's your slider bar right there on your counter. A micro story to anchor it. A 38-year-old project manager loved his weekend French press so much he made it his daily routine. Big pot, heavy mug, no filter. His LDL crept from 118 to 155 over 2 annual checkups. He wasn't thrilled about statins. His doctor asked one question, brewing method. He swapped to paper-filtered drip on weekdays, kept the press for Saturdays and Sundays. 3 months later, LDL landed at 128. Same beans, same dose of caffeine, different filter. He kept his weekend ritual and his doctor's approval. Consumers always ask, does origin matter? Not for Cafestol in a way that rescues you. Origin, altitude, and variety shape flavor, not the fact that oils carry diterpenes. Roast level doesn't solve it either. Lighter or darker shifts taste and yield slightly, but the meaningful variable is whether oils pass through a filter. If a brand claims their special origin is heart-friendly while selling only metal filter recipes, press them for data. The mechanism is well studied. Marketing doesn't rewrite it. There's nuance with espresso. A double shot has more Cafestol than a paper-filtered cup, but total volume is small. If you drink 1 or 2 shots a day, your overall exposure can stay modest. If your habit is 6 milk drinks built on doubles, that's different. Volume matters. You can even slip a paper insert into some metal baskets. Third-party discs exist to cut oil transfer without wrecking crema. Cafes won't love the hack. Your lipid panel might. Europe folds Cafestol into broader claim policing. If a brand wants to say heart-healthy, regulators ask whether the brewing advice matches the claim. In the US, you'll see metal filter aesthetics everywhere, beautiful steel cones, reusable baskets, without a mention of diterpenes. The look is sustainable. The chemistry says otherwise unless you pair it with paper or change frequency. Practical tweaks are boring and effective. Use paper filters most days. Keep the press, mocha, or boiled coffee as a treat. If you love metal filter pour-over, drop in a thin paper pre-filter, grind a bit coarser to maintain flow, and accept a tiny change in mouthfeel. For espresso fans, moderate volume, consider smaller shots and avoid chasing long shots that pull extra oils through extended contact. With cold brew, filter through paper at the end rather than relying on mesh. You'll still get the chocolatey profile with less oil. Here's the part nobody wants to hear because it's too simple. Instant coffee is low in Cafestol. If you're managing LDL closely, a decent freeze-dried cup with good water can carry you on rushed mornings while you save your unfiltered ritual for the weekend. Flavor snobs can wince. Your arteries don't care. Your lever is daily habit, not an exotic bean. If a brand is transparent, they'll share a brew method matrix on their site and nudge paper filter choices without scolding. If they sell only metal filters and heart-healthy lines, ask for their Cafestol data. You're not being difficult. You're asking the question Europe has been quietly answering for years. Cafestol rides with another diterpene, Kahweol, that complicates the health story and shows up in the same oily layer. That twin is next. 4. Kahweol, the complicated twin. Cafestol doesn't travel alone. In that same shimmering layer of coffee oils lives Kahweol, another diterpene that shows up when you brew without paper. It's the twin that keeps researchers arguing at conferences because the lab signals aren't neat. In cell studies, Kahweol can look protective, anti-inflammatory here, anti-tumor there. In humans drinking unfiltered coffee, LDL still climbs. Both ride the oil, both come through metal and boiled brews. Your blood work doesn't separate the twin. Here's the tension. People love a hero molecule. Kahweol sometimes behaves like one in Petri dishes and animal models. But the LDL story you can measure in your body folds both diterpenes together. Nordic guidance treats them as a pair. If you want the upside of coffee without nudging cholesterol north, filter the oils. Europe doesn't chase the romance of lab findings when the real-world biomarker moves the wrong way week after week. In the US, you barely hear the word. The metal filter aesthetic, sleek cones, reusable baskets, pressed pots, wins the eye test and the sustainability pitch. Kahweol becomes a footnote, even though it's riding the same brew you're posting on Instagram. Claim policing is looser, so a brand can glow up antioxidants and skip the part about diterpenes raising LDL in habitual unfiltered drinkers. That gap is why you felt the LDL section a moment ago. Kahweol keeps the stakes there. Let's talk levers you control. Paper inserts are the quiet hack. Slide a thin paper disc into a metal cone or basket, then grind a touch coarser to keep flow steady. You'll still get body, you'll trap more oil. If you love the French press, use it less often in short and steep times, 4 minutes instead of 7, and pour through a paper-lined strainer before the cup. It's not purist, it's practical. You're lowering Kahweol and Cafestol without giving up the ritual. Espresso needs math, not myths. A single shot is oily but small. 2 shots once or twice a day usually land below what a daily 12-ounce press delivers. The problem creeps in when a quick double turns into 4 milk drinks by noon. Volume compounds exposure. You can also fit paper puck screens or paper discs above or below the espresso bed. They tidy the puck and shave oil transfer. Baristas debate taste impact. Your lipid panel votes with numbers. Grind size matters in a sneaky way. Finer grind increases extraction and emulsifies more oils into the liquor. That helps Kahweol move. If you're committed to metal filtration, back the grind off a notch and accept a faster drawdown. You'll slide mouthfeel toward clarity and reduce oil carryover. With cold brew, brew strong if you like, but filter through paper at the end. The long, cool steep extracts less Kahweol than boiling, and the paper cut finishes the job. Origin and roast won't rescue you. Different beans and processing tweak total oil content and flavor, but the dominant variable is still filtration. Lighter roasts sometimes feel cleaner, yet diterpenes ride in the oil regardless. Darker roasts can break down some compounds and change yields, but the effect isn't enough to turn metal filter coffee into paper filter coffee. If a label whispers high altitude or shade grown as a heart health stand-in, ask for diterpene data by brew method. You'll hear silence. Now, about those mixed lab signals, it's fine to appreciate that Kahweol shows promise in models. Coffee is complex. Not every compound fits a villain box, but daily choices should lean on outcomes you can measure in people. LDL moves with unfiltered brews. Paper reverses it. That's the scoreboard. Europe aligns public advice with that, and claim reviewers push brands to keep storytelling honest. If a US brand leans hard on natural oils as a virtue, read that as more diterpenes unless you filter. Your takeaway is simple and annoying. Prep, not origin, sets your Kahweol dose. Use paper most days. Treat metal, press, mocha, and boiled as a sometimes thing. If espresso is your lane, manage volume and consider paper aids. These are small, boring fixes with measurable effects. The romantic part of coffee is the aroma. The responsible part is the filter. We've lived in oils long enough. The next chapter leaves the brew bar and heads back to the farm, where natural gets complicated by chemicals with long half-lives and short patience in European law. 5. Legacy pesticides. What Europe revoked: Chlorpyrifos, Endosulfan. Walk the rows on a warm afternoon and you'll see neat weed strips, tidy cherries, and a sprayer that looks like a backpack. For decades, two names rode those straps on coffee farms: Chlorpyrifos and Endosulfan. They solved problems fast. The berry borer, the leaf miner, weeds that stole water, and they stuck around in ways regulators eventually wouldn't tolerate. Start with Chlorpyrifos. It's an organophosphate that targets insect nervous systems. The problem is the proximity to our own. Europe looked at neurodevelopmental concerns, signals about prenatal exposure in children's brains, and pulled the plug, revoking approvals and driving residue limits for coffee down to near zero. It wasn't theoretical. If a lab found Chlorpyrifos above the default, the lot didn't get a scolding. It got turned away. Meanwhile, the US timeline wobbled. Household uses went years earlier. Agricultural uses seesawed, court fights dragged, and tolerances lagged. The practical difference is simple. A container that sails past a US tolerance can still fail a European import screen. Endosulfan tells a dirtier story. It's persistent, bioaccumulative, and ugly for fish, birds, and bees. The global system finally moved to phase it out, but chemical stockpiles don't vanish just because a rule changes. In parts of the coffee belt, dusty drums stuck around in sheds. Sprayers used the old stuff to keep pests at bay, then sold beans into markets that weren't looking as hot. Europe did look. When residues surfaced, enforcement tightened, and near-zero limits made the conversation short. Not in our market. Here's how that hits people. A co-op in a hot valley had a choice when their German buyer sent a terse email. Traces of Chlorpyrifos detected, shipment rejected. They could blame bad luck and chase easier buyers in looser markets, or they could change what happened on those hillsides. The board met under a tin roof and chose the harder road. They called agronomists, ripped out old stock, and moved to integrated pest management, IPM, traps for the berry borer, shade to cool the microclimate, targeted biological controls, less bare soil, more ground cover. They bought moisture meters for drying to keep mold pressure down so they wouldn't be tempted to solve problems with banned sprays in panic. It wasn't pretty for 2 harvests. Yields dipped, training took time, and one exporter stopped returning calls. But the European buyer kept the door open, contingent on clean third-party tests. By year 3, the co-op had a stronger contract, a premium for compliance, and a new reputation as the group that passes every lab. The shade trees cooled the pickers too. Split supply chains get awkward fast. One Brazilian exporter learned to segregate. Pallets for Bremen followed a strict playbook, audited inputs, signed grower declarations, random field tests, and monthly multi-residue screens for the lot. Pallets for Baltimore moved on commercial paperwork and faith. It's the same farm region, the same milling equipment, even the same bag marks, until you read the analysis report. Antwerp sees low teens in substances screened. Houston sees a custom stamp and a bill of lading. That's how the same harvest lives two lives. Retailers in Europe pile on pressure where it counts. Their private codes don't just mirror law, they push it. No detection of EU revoked actives at LOQ or below 0.01 mg/kg, reads a spec. Another adds field audits unannounced, retain samples for 12 months. Producers gripe, then do the work. A US importer asks for a certificate and shrugs at a composite test from last year. One path makes residue spikes rarer. The other discovers problems in headline. Farmers aren't villains in this story. They're squeezed by weather, pests, debt, and buyers who want perfect beans at low prices. Legacy pesticides promise certainty. When Europe revoked them, certainty became process, not product. Do you maintain your sprayer seals so they don't leak old chemistry? Do you store new inputs away from old drums? Do you train pickers to spot borer damage early so treatments can be localized and legal? Those choices are tedious. They also decide whether a truck turns around at the port. One port micro story. A container flagged in Europe for Chlorpyrifos hit barely above the default. The importer had two options, incinerate at cost or re-export. They rerouted to a US buyer who could legally sell it. On the receiving dock, a manager whispered, "It'll blend down." That sentence is why you're watching this video. Your lever as a buyer is small and real. Ask for multi-residue tests on the lot, not a generic country certificate. Look for language like EU compliant from importers who sell into strict retailers. They've already done the screens for revoked actives. Certifications help but aren't a shield. Lab reports beat logos. If a brand publishes annual summaries showing detection rates and the list of actives screened, you've found a grown-up. One more quiet truth. Europe's pressure changed fields. Shade programs didn't just lower temps, they brought birds that eat pests. IPM didn't just cut sprays, it taught timing and scouting. The farm that used to reach for Chlorpyrifos found a new rhythm. The cup got better and cleaner because someone at a border asked a boring question. What's in this bean? 6. Heavy metals. Lead and cadmium aren't flavor notes. Walk into a dry mill on a windy afternoon and you'll feel it in your teeth. Dust riding every sunbeam. That dust can carry more than chaff. Lead finds its way in from old paint on hoppers and conveyors, solder in antique roasters, and flaking pipes in wash stations. Cadmium shows up from phosphate fertilizers, mining legacy, and certain volcanic soils that hold it tight. None of this is romantic terroir. It's quiet exposure built into places beans touch before they ever hit a drum. Europe treats heavy metals like non-negotiables. For lead, there are maximum levels set for categories of foods and routine monitoring at import and retail. Buyers add their own screens and reject anything brushing those limits. For cadmium, they track commodities known to accumulate and push suppliers to prove numbers sit low and stable. In the US, metals are framed as adulterants. If a batch is egregiously contaminated, it's illegal. But there's rarely a commodity-specific cap that triggers a border stop. You see the difference in what gets caught and where. Here, as how it lands in a real supply chain. Cooperative dries parchment on concrete patios that were poured decades ago. Tiny paint flakes from a nearby wall drift in. A few lots get trucked to a mill with aging sifters and rusty screws. The cup tastes fine. The lab says a little lead. Not enough to set off alarms in one system. Enough to cause a European buyer to call and say, audit the line. Replace the contact surfaces. Show us swabs and a new test. That's not theatric. That's how you keep metal out of a child's breakfast table years down the road. Cadmium sneakier. You can farm perfectly and still pull beans from a hillside that's naturally high in it. Some volcanic belts are proud marketing points. They're also geological flags for a buyer who knows their maps. The responsible importers screen origin by origin and adjust blends if a microregion trends high. They don't guess, they test. They may switch to lots grown with low cadmium fertilizers and more organic matter in the soil to dilute uptake. And they'll ask agronomists to adjust pH to make cadmium less available to roots. Those tweaks don't fit on a bag, but they live in emails that decide whether pallets move. Inside mills, the fixes are boring and rigid. Bag liners so jute fibers don't shed into green beans, magnet and metal detectors after hulling, sealed conveyors that don't sand hardware into the product, vacuum systems that pull dust out and filter it rather than recirculating it. In Europe, buyer audits walk those lines with swab kits and clipboards. In the US, you'll see a spotless cupping room and a tour. One model prevents, the other hopes. Port microstory sticks. In West Africa, a forklift clipped a drum of lead-based primer stored too close to food cargo. Dust spread across a row of containers. The European consignee declared an incident, quarantined the stack, and paid for disposal. The same ship offloaded a sister container in the US. The broker logged a delay and found a discount buyer willing to take the coffee as is. It brewed fine. The lab, nobody asked. Producers who pass European screens make changes you can point to. A mid-size mill replaced painted steel chutes with food-grade stainless, swapped out rivets for welds, and scheduled quarterly wipe tests at specific contact points. Post-huller, post-color sorter, pre-bagger. They moved drying from cracked patios to raised beds with mesh and tarps, and they started covering beds during traffic hours so road dust didn't settle. Lead numbers dropped. Cadmium stayed steady because geology doesn't negotiate, so they rebalanced sourcing within the region and put the higher cadmium microlots into markets where exposure limits were looser but still legal. Then a retailer in Northern Europe added a line, demonstrate cadmium trend over 12 months, provide soil management plan. The mill hired a soil consultant and kept the account. At the roaster, you're not off the hook. Old sampling triers and cooling trays shed metal if they're pitted. Negative pressure ducts can pull urban dust across open beans. Best practice is to keep green and roasted paths sealed, use food-grade gaskets that don't crumble, and service cyclone separators so they don't leak particulate back. European buyers ask for maintenance logs. American marketing teams ask for photos. What can you do from your kitchen? Aim for importers and brands that publish heavy metal results by lot or at least by origin, not just a single "we test" line. Look for language about EU market compliance and retailer audits, because those phrases usually mean regular screenings. If a brand celebrates beans from high cadmium regions without a word on metals, write them. Ask about lead controls in mills, bag liners, stainless contact points, dust management, and how often they test cadmium in those origins. Lead has no safe level. Cadmium accumulates over a lifetime. You won't taste either in your cup, and no logo guarantees their absence. But buyers with clipped pens and swab kits change what's in your mug. Europe writes those questions into contracts. You can write them into emails. 7. Mycotoxins, Ochratoxin A and the drying clock. While metals ride dust and hardware, Ochratoxin A rides time. OTA isn't sprayed or roasted in. It's born when coffee slows down at the wrong moment. Wet cherries stacked too deep, parchment drying too slowly, bags sweating in a damp warehouse. A few days of bad decisions can write a toxin into a lot that tasted perfect on the patio. And once it's there, roasting doesn't save you. OTA is stubborn. Europe treats OTA with a number and a stopwatch. There are maximum levels for green and roasted coffee and systematic import checks that don't care about marketing. Inspectors don't debate flavor. They read a lab result and compare it to the line. If you sit above it, the shipment stops. The US publishes guidance and action levels, and agencies encourage best practices, but routine border testing is rarer. Again, it's two gates. One expects proof. One expects good intentions until a problem surfaces. Walk the drying yard. It's harvest peak, clouds build by noon, and pickers haul tops of cherries to the depulper. If the Cooperativa's pulper line backs up, that fruit sits. Microbes wake up. After washing, parchment moves to patios or beds. On bare concrete, beans spread thick to save space. The first 2 days matter most. You need airflow, sun, and turning fast to push moisture from 55% toward the teens before mold takes a foothold. If rain hits and tarps arrive late, you trap humidity against warm beans. A day like that can turn a clean lot into an OTA risk. Raised beds change the clock. Air moves both above and below. Beans dry more evenly and faster. Producers with moisture meters don't guess. They turn with a target, aiming for that steady drop without case hardening the outer layer. Shade nets come out at midday to slow surface heating while the core dries. Tarps cover beds at the first spit of rain, keeping showers from soaking a day's progress. It's choreography. Get it right, you outrun mold. Get it wrong, you pay for it at the port. Storage is the second trap. Parchment that hits the right moisture, 5 to 12%, still swings with humidity if warehouses breathe. Stacks against walls wick damp, bare floors push moisture up, and corrugated roofs drip during cool nights. In Europe-facing supply chains, warehouses run humidity logs and use pallets, bag liners, and airflow lanes. They audit for roof leaks and keep fumigants away from food zones so you don't trade one problem for another. US-bound coffee often sits where space allows. It leaves fine, arrives fine most of the time, and every so often, a container that baked in the sun and cooled at night sweats inside its metal walls. That microclimate wakes fungi you thought you left on the patio. A case that still makes buyers twitch. A mid-Atlantic shipment landed in summer. The exporter's certificate said dry, sound, loyal, merchantable. The importer's warehouse felt like a gym locker, humid, warm, stale. They pulled samples and the OTA number came back high. The same lot had cleared origin tests. The difference? 2 weeks on the water with no desiccants, a tropical storm delay, and a hot truck inland. A European client would have tested on arrival. In this market, the importer discovered it while blending. They ate the loss and rewrote their SOP. Data loggers in every container, desiccant units by the pallet, and a rule that any relative humidity excursion triggers arrival testing before a single bag is opened. Mitigation looks simple on a poster and relentless in practice. Pick ripe, process the same day, clean tanks and channels so leftover mucilage doesn't seed microbes, spread thin on raised beds, turn on a schedule, cover at rain, measure moisture, not guess before bagging, then store on pallets away from walls with airflow and humidity control. Bag liners help, so do clean jute and fewer handling. Producers who sell into European retailers can recite this in their sleep because auditors ask for the evidence. Drying logs, moisture readings, warehouse RH charts, and OTA lab certificates per lot, not per season. Your lever is to favor suppliers who face the strict gate. Look for brands that name their OTA screens, not just we test. If they sell into the EU, they're already meeting import checks or retailer codes that sit below legal maximums. Ask if they use raised bed suppliers, moisture meters, and container data loggers. The answers sound boring. That's the point. At home, you can't remove OTA by brewing, but you can lower the odds you buy it. Whole beans from short, cool supply chains, valved bags, recent roast dates, beat bargain blends of unknown age. Small importers who publish arrival tests are your friends. If you see a lot of water-damaged bags and warehouse-stored deals, step around them. OTA hides in the stories nobody tells on a label. We've handled mold and time. Now we step into Decaf, where the chemistry is chosen on purpose and where Europe reads the residues line by line. 8 Decaf solvents, methylene chloride, EA, and Co2. Decaf starts with a choice nobody puts on the front of the bag: how to pull caffeine out without dragging in trouble. 3 routes dominate: methylene chloride, ethyl acetate, and supercritical Co2, and Europe reads each one with a microscope while the US mostly trusts the label and the plant's paperwork. Methylene chloride, or MC, works. It's efficient, preserves flavor well, and has been used for decades. The catch is residue control and worker safety. Europe doesn't ban MC outright for decaf coffee, but importers and retailers run tight audits, closed systems, validated purges, low detection limits on finished beans, and regular third-party tests. Plants have to prove purge times, temperatures, and airflow actually remove solvent. In the US, MC is permitted within limits, and compliance often rides on self-documentation. Same chemistry, different execution pressure. Inside a decaf plant that wants European business, the process looks like a flight checklist. Beans are moistened to open pores, exposed to MC in a closed loop, then stripped, steamed, and dried. Operators log solvent-to-bean ratios by batch, inlet, and outlet MC concentrations, column temperatures, and purge durations. They run gas chromatography on retained samples and won't ship if numbers nick the spec. A buyer in Germany gets a certificate with lot ID, method, and residuals in mg/kg. Stateside, a similar plant can meet domestic allowances and ship without that extra layer of buyer scrutiny. The coffee tastes good in both markets. Only one buyer calls if the lab sheet is missing a line. Ethyl acetate, EA, sells itself as natural when it's sourced from fermentation, but purity and system design carry the risk. Closed-loop EA systems echo MC in the workflow: solvent contact, separation, purge. The difference is marketing halo versus actual controls. European retailers don't care about the adjective. They care about pharma-grade solvent specs, validated recovery rates, and low residuals verified by independent lab. A plant using industrial-grade EA or sloppy gaskets leaks off notes and risk. US sellers can still wave at the word sugarcane and move pallets. Europe asks, show us the assay on your EA and the chromatograms on your beans. Then there's Co2. Supercritical CO2 extraction is the cleanest on paper. No chlorinated solvent, no ester to purge, just pressurized CO2 that selectively grabs caffeine, then vents off to be recycled. It's capital heavy and costs more per pound, which is why you see it favored by European retailers that can absorb the premium and demand lot-by-lot verification anyway. The cup integrity is excellent, and the residue conversation goes quiet because there's nothing to find beyond trace water and CO2. When a private label spec reads, CO2 decaf preferred, that's shorthand for fewer emails, fewer audits, fewer surprises at the border. A shipment proved the gap. A U.S. roaster bought MC decaf that tested below U.S. limits, tasted great, and passed internal QA. The European retailer's private code required a stricter internal maximum below the legal EU limit and an on-arrival test. The lot spiked slightly above their code after 2 weeks in transit and a warm warehouse stop. It wasn't illegal, it failed a buyer promise. The fix cost real money: reroute the container, reprocess a replacement, and eat freight on both legs. The roaster rewrote their supplier agreement, purged to XMG/kg with stability data post-transport. Next time, the beans cleared. From the consumer side, decaf choice isn't a vibe, it's a spec. If a bag says MC, ask for residual thresholds and third-party results. If it says EA, ask about solvent purity, closed-loop design, and residual specs on finished beans, not just the claim natural. If it says CO2, you're paying for equipment and energy. Make sure the roaster didn't quietly blend methods. Brands that sell in Europe will often publish method and limits because their buyers force transparency. Brands that only sell domestically might answer with adjectives. Push for numbers. Workers live with these systems every day, so audits matter beyond your cup. European buyers request safety protocols, leak detection logs, air monitoring data, and training records. They want to see solvent recovery percentages and maintenance schedules on seals and pumps. That paperwork culture protects the crew in the room and keeps residues down. In looser markets, it's easier to accept a plant tour and a handshake. The beans can taste identical. The risk profile is. There's a quiet middle path, EA done right. Fermentation-derived EA in a closed loop with high-purity inputs, validated purges, and tight packaging downstream gets close to CO2 outcomes at a lower price. But you only know if you see the lab sheets. Some European chains accept audited EA decaf as their standard. US labels lean on sugarcane without the assay. That distance is the whole story in one word. Your kitchen lever is simple. Prefer CO2 decaf when price allows. If you choose EA, pick roasters who disclose their plant partner and publish residual targets. If you choose MC, demand proof of low residuals and recent tests. For all methods, look for roasters who cite EU retailer specs or say EU compliant. They've already jumped through the hoop you can't see. And remember transport. Rested, valved packaging and cool logistics keep post-purge drift from biting you on arrival. We left mold behind to choose a solvent on purpose. Next, we make sure a ghost from the 196s stays buried. 9. Trichloroethylene, the decaf ghost of the 1960s. We just walked through MC, EA, and CO2. Now meet the solvent that shouldn't be anywhere near modern coffee, but still shadows the conversation, trichloroethylene. In the 196s, some decaf plants used TCE because it stripped caffeine fast. It was cheap, effective, and toxic. Over time, links to cancer and organ damage pushed it out of food uses. Europe drew a hard line, industry moved on, and modern decaf facilities don't touch it. So why bring up a ghost? Because documentation beats nostalgia, and old habits echo in paperwork. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Supply chains remember. Decades-old equipment gets resold, second-hand vessels get repurposed, and vendors brag about traditional processes without saying what traditional actually meant. No reputable European retailer will accept, "Trust us, it's the classic way." They ask for method declarations, solvent purchase records, recovery logs, and third-party residue screens that include chlorinated solvents, TCE among them. It's not that anyone expects to find TCE in a serious plant. It's that you verify the absence the same way you verify the presence of anything else, with data. A brand story makes the point. A roaster launched a heritage decaf celebrating a mid-century Italian method. The copy glowed, the buyer in Scandinavia frowned. Heritage is not a method. The retailer asked for the line diagram, solvent lists, and residue panel. The plant ran EA in a closed loop. The roaster had simply never seen the SOPs. The retailer flagged the missing documentation as a failure of control. The roaster tightened contracts, added chlorinated solvent screens to every lot, and rewrote the label. Same beans, safer story. Europe's hard line lives in those buyer codes. No use of prohibited solvents, mandatory screening at strict limits of quantification, and retention samples held for retro-testing. Plants that sell into this world maintain live binders, calibration certificates, solvent assays, batch logs, purge validations, so when a retailer asks, they can answer in minutes, not weeks. In the US, a brand can lean on European-style decaf and hope no one asks for chromatogram. If you're a daily decaf drinker, you want the buyer who asks, why still test for a solvent nobody legit uses? Because history tells you to. TCE was pervasive across industries. Degreasing, dry cleaning, metal shops, and contamination can migrate. A plant might share infrastructure with non-food operations on the same property. An old gasket might leach. A contractor could clean a tank with the wrong agent. The way you keep a ghost buried is to make the test routine, not special. From the consumer side, your questions are simple. What decaf method? Which plant? Do you screen finished beans for chlorinated solvents, including TCE, at sensitive detection limits? If the brand sells in Europe, they'll know these answers by heart because their buyers demand them. If they sell only domestically and give you adjectives, push for numbers. You're not accusing, you're confirming the obvious. There's a second payoff. Documentation protects workers. Plants that live under European audits show solvent leak logs, air monitoring data, and training records. That culture of proof keeps crews safer and residues lower. If a brand talks romance and not records, you've learned something about their supply chain priority. The rule is boring and clean. Demand current method proof, not vibes. Accept CO2, audited EA, or tightly controlled MC with published residuals and explicit no TCE screening. When old words like traditional float by, ask which tradition. The good ones will tell you, and they'll show the lab work that lets you sleep. 10. Processing aids. Defoamers, anticaking, and invisible ingredients. We just buried an old solvent. Now we're stepping into the stuff that doesn't appear on labels but shapes what lands in your mug. Processing aids. These aren't flavors. They're tools, defoamers to keep extraction vessels from boiling over, carriers to help instant coffee dissolve, clarifiers to polish cold brew, and Europe treats them like chemicals with jobs and limits, not ghosts that vanish in marketing. Start with extraction lines for instant and concentrates. When coffee slurry foams under heat and vacuum, operators dose a tiny amount of defoamer, often polydimethylsiloxane, PDMS, to keep the boil stable and protect equipment. It's not a culinary ingredient, it's process control. In Europe, PDMS has purity criteria and use conditions, and buyers expect proof that what goes in either doesn't survive or sits below strict limits on the way out. Plants log lot numbers, dosing rates, and removal steps, and they hold retention samples so a retailer can confirm PDMS sits under the line. In the US, good manufacturing practice language says use as needed. That can mean clean, careful work, or trust me. Instant coffee has another quiet passenger. Carriers. Spray-dried and agglomerated products sometimes use maltodextrin to help granules form and dissolve. Flow agents like silica can keep powder moving in fill hoppers. None of this is scandalous. All of it needs spec sheets. European retailers ask, food grade or pharma grade, what's the heavy metal limit on your silica? Are there allergens in your maltodextrin source? They also want residual solvent data for aroma recovery steps, and they'll check that the carrier itself meets EU additive purity rules. A US label can read 100% coffee and still have a processing aid that never triggers an ingredient line. That's how rules work. It's also how stories stretch. Flavored beans are a minefield of invisible. To stick oil-based flavors to roasted beans, manufacturers use carriers and solvents, propylene glycol, triacetin, or ethanol, and the quality of those inputs matters. Cheap glycols can carry impurities. Poorly cured coatings can migrate into packaging. Europe's claim police ask for certificates of analysis on every additive, migration testing for the bag films, and confirmation that flavor application happens after beans cool so chemicals don't volatilize into a worker's lungs or a bag's headspace. Private code might read, no diethylene glycol, propylene glycol USB only, packaging migration below XMG/DM2. In a looser market, you'll see hazelnut and a smiling cup. Cold brew brought its own new props. Big tanks pull colloids and fines that make haze. Operators turn to fining agents and clarifiers, PVPP, gelatin alternatives, filter aids to polish the liquor. The rule in Europe is simple. If you use a fining agent, it must be removable and you need proof. Plants run turbidity before and after, then screen for residual polymer. They document filtration steps, filter media specs, and disposal protocols so nothing cycles back into the food stream. US plants can operate with similar care. They just aren't pushed by buyers as hard to show the receipts. Packaging can add its own invisible stack. Flavor pouches in boxed cold brew, oxygen scavengers tucked into instant jars, lidding adhesives on capsules. Each has a migration profile. European audits walk the BOM, Bill of Materials, through a compliance check. Specific migration limits, dual-use substances, printing inks on the non-food side only, and seal layers that don't leach under heat. They'll request supplier declarations for each layer in a laminate and test if the risk model says to. US brands often trust the converter's promise and move on. Here's the micro moment that changes behavior. A buyer notices a faint slick on a finished concentrate and asks for a PDMS chromatogram. The plant can't produce it. The lot isn't necessarily unsafe, it's undocumented. The retailer holds the order, the plant scrambles to validate removal, and a week later a line appears in the shop. Record defoamer dose, verify post-evap residue below X, retain sample for 12 months. One line, fewer mysteries in your cup. What do you ask from your side of the counter? If you drink instant or ready to drink, look for brands that publish additive and processing aid policies. USB or EU pharmacopoeia grades for glycols, silica that meets food additive purity, no titanium dioxide kids tricks, and batch COAs on request. If you love flavored beans, ask what carrier they use, whether it's USB grade, and whether they perform migration testing on their bags. If you buy cold brew, ask which clarifier they use and how they confirm removal. Paper-filtered concentrates that skip polymers altogether are safest. Roasters who sell into Europe already have these answers because buyers force them to. They'll mention EU purity criteria, pharma-grade inputs, and migration tests. If the answers you get are adjectives, clean, natural, handcrafted, keep pressing until you see a number or a spec. Processing aids aren't evil, they're tools. You just deserve to know which ones touched your coffee and whether they left the room when the job was done. 11. Furan derivatives and packaging choices. We already met furan in capsules, but it doesn't travel alone. Derivatives like 2-methylfuran and 3-methylfuran form during roasting too, and they behave like furan's impatient cousins, volatile, eager to leave, but easily trapped when packaging locks the door. The choice between cans, capsules, bricks, or valved bags decides whether those compounds end up in the headspace or in your cup. Here's the fork in the road. Valved bags with rested whole beans let volatiles bleed out gradually without dragging oxygen in. Ground coffee in rigid cans or foil bricks often get sealed quickly with little degassing time, so furan and its methyl derivatives build in the headspace. Pop the seal, brew right away, and you pull that concentrated puff into the first pour. Capsule formats stack the effect. Fine grind, tight seal, small headspace that saturates fast, then pressurized brewing that ejects what's in the pocket straight into the crema. Engineering details turn the dial. Lidding films on capsules have specific oxygen transmission rates. Switch the film, change how the headspace evolves. Nitrogen quality matters too. High-purity nitrogen reduces oxygen that could react while still allowing inert flushing that carries volatiles away if purge times are long enough. Leak checks decide whether every capsule behaves like the spec or only most of them. A line that accepts 3 leakers per 1,000 will act differently from a line that forces 1 per 10,000. You can taste consistency. You measure furan. European buyer audits live in that detail. They'll ask for the oxygen ppm in headspace at pack and after storage, the degassing time before grinding, and purge duration per capsule. They'll walk the leak detection station and request control charts, proof that the process holds week after week, not just the day the factory hosted a tour. In the US, the same brand might talk up oxygen-free packing and freshness lock without publishing a single number. One culture treats packaging like a chemical instrument. The other treats it like a marketing panel. Now the trade-off everyone tiptoes around, crema versus chemistry. Fast filling right after roast, ultra-fine grind, aggressive pre-infusion, these give you gorgeous crema and a louder aroma on day one. They also trap more furan derivatives. Stretch the rest, ease grind friction heat, lengthen purge, and you keep the crema respectable while letting more volatiles leave before sealing. Some European capsule makers even segment SKUs. Bar crema for looks, clean cup for lower volatiles, both validated with lab work. You don't see those options on many American shelves. Cans and bricks are their own story. Large volumes of ground coffee get sealed at speed. If the line adds a brief rest, hours not days, and vents before final seam or heat seal, headspace levels drop. If not, compounds accumulate until the can opener vents them into your kitchen. Valved bags with ground coffee help a little, but valves work best with whole beans. Powder can clog paths and slow diffusion. That's why grind and fill timing is the phrase serious buyers repeat. Not just when it was roasted, but how long it lived with a way out. The lever is simple. Prefer rested whole beans in valved bags, especially if the roaster shares rest windows. If you use capsules, look for makers who publish headspace oxygen targets, leak rates, and degassing times, or at least reference them clearly. For ground coffee, shorter shelf life, smaller pack sizes, and evidence of pre-seal venting beat giant cans that promise aroma forever. And if a brand boasts endless crema without a word on rest, assume the foam is carrying more than flavor. Process transparency beats premium labels every time. Ask for the numbers that packaging engineers actually track. If a company has them, they'll answer. If they don't, the aroma is doing more talking than the lab. Chlorogenic acid metabolites. When antioxidant bites back. We've been living in packaging and process. Now we're stepping into your cup's chemistry, specifically the compounds everyone loves to hype, chlorogenic acids. CGAs give coffee a chunk of its antioxidant story. But when they hit heat, water, and your gut, they break into caffeic and quinic acids. Those metabolites shape flavor and sometimes bite back as reflux, enamel stress, and why does this taste like chewing aspirin? Moment. Here's the stakes in human terms. You chase health with extra antioxidant claims, swallow a supplement that concentrates green coffee extract, and end up with heartburn or bathroom regrets. On a brew bar, super bright light roasts with long extractions can spike perceived acidity and irritation for sensitive drinkers. None of this makes coffee bad. It means dose and preparation decide how your body reads those molecules. What actually happens? Roasting doesn't erase CGAs, it reshapes them. Lighter roasts carry more intact CGAs. Darker roasts convert and degrade them into a web of phenolics and lactones. Then brewing time and temperature finish the job, pulling caffeic and quinic acids into your cup. Paper filters don't change CGAs directly like they do oils, but dialing grind and contact time does. Shorter extractions at moderate heat shift the balance toward flavor you want and less bite you don't. Meanwhile, Europe keeps the hype on a leash. High-dose green coffee extracts fall under novel foods and claim policing. If you want to sell 10x antioxidant capsules, regulators ask, authorized, safe at that dose, substantiated. Retail buyers lean harder. No disease claims, capped daily servings, and warning lines for sensitive groups. In the US, supplements skate longer on marketing until enforcement catches up. That's how a compound that's pleasant in a mug becomes uncomfortable in a pill. Flavor tells you when chemistry is loud. That sharp, lingering aftertaste that feels medicinal. Often quinic acid in a brew that ran long and hot, especially with fine grind and a choked bed. That sudden my teeth feel naked sensation over weeks. Acid-heavy routines without rinsing or neutral water. People blame origin. Process is the lever. Here's a practical arc you can run tomorrow. If bright light roasts give you reflux, step to a medium roast and drop brew temperature a notch, say 92-94 C instead of boiling. Grind a hair coarser and keep your pour steady so you're not re-agitating fines. Stop the drawdown before the bed runs dry. Those last drips are where harshness lives. If you love immersion, shorten steep by 30 seconds and don't squeeze the filter. Pressing wrings out the bitter tail. Paper helps here too. A clean filter cuts haze and keeps your palate from reading roughness as acidity. Cold brew complicates the myth. Yes, cooler extraction pulls fewer harsh acids, but a 24-hour soak can still over-extract if the grind's too fine. Go coarser, filter through paper, and dilute to taste. You're chasing balance, not bragging rights on steep time. Teeth and stomach are different battlegrounds. For enamel, the trick is exposure time, not terror. Don't sip all morning. Drink, then rinse with water. Mineral-balanced brew water, modest bicarbonate buffers perception without turning your cup flat. For reflux, smaller servings and food with the cup matter more than origin stories. Some drinkers find that espresso, despite tasting sharp, sits better than a giant mug because volume is low and contact is quick. Try it, then test your own response. About the supplement aisle, be careful. Green coffee bean extracts concentrate CGA beyond what daily drinking delivers. Europe forces dossiers and authorization before those doses hit shelves with health claims. In the US, you'll see supports weight management on bottles that leaned on weak studies. If you're tempted, ask for authorization status, daily CGA content, and adverse event data. If answers are fuzzy, walk. One micro story to anchor it. A nurse loved ultralight Ethiopian pour-overs, brewed hot and long because she wanted all the antioxidants. She also lived on antacids. She switched to a medium roast, cut water temp, used a Kalida with paper, and stopped the pour at 2 minutes 30. Same farm, different parameters. The heartburn faded. The citrus notes stayed. Your levers are boring and effective. Medium roasts, cooler water, paper filters, shorter extractions, mineral-smart water, and skepticism toward megadose green coffee pills. Antioxidant isn't a free pass. It's a word that needs context. Brew like you want the cup to love you back. How it sneaks in a farm, to port to roaster to you. To see how chemicals end up in your mug, follow one bean. On the farm, the first decisions are weeds and water. A grower sprays a strip under trees so pickers can move fast. If that strip sees a herbicide Europe revoked, residues start right there. Irrigation can carry cadmium from phosphate fertilizers. A cheap blend with high cadmium content seems harmless until soil tests say otherwise. Spray rigs matter too. Old gaskets drip legacy actives even after switching product. The calendar is a chemical, and it writes itself on leaves and fruit. Harvest flips the risk board. Pickers load cherries into sacks that used to carry fertilizer. Microresidues transfer. Wash stations use river water that ran past a mining site. Trace metals hitch a ride into the tank. A chipped epoxy lining on a fermenter scrapes into mucilage. Fragments don't taste, but labs see them. A tired mechanic patches a pump with the wrong sealant. Solvents from last week's job linger. None of this shows on flavor notes. It shows in spreadsheets at import. Drying is a fork with a clock. Bare patios save money and space, but dirt and dust add metals, and the slow start gives mold a window to make OTA. Raised beds speed airflow and cleanliness, yet they need turning schedules and tarps at rain. A stray afternoon storm hits and workers throw plastic over thick layers late. Condensation forms, heat builds, and fungi wake. The beans still look fine. The lot now carries a number Europe cares about. Milling adds machines and hands. Hullers with worn steel scuff metal into green coffee. Sifters blow recirculated dust because filters weren't changed. Jute bags shed fibers and whatever the fibers picked up in prior storage. Pallets stored beside pesticides at the warehouse pick up vapors. The smell fades, the residue doesn't. A careful mill installs bag liners, seals conveyors, swaps painted chutes for stainless, and vacuums dust out instead of moving it around. The cup doesn't change, the lab does. Transport is a chemistry set in motion. Container floors hold residues from the last cargo, fertilizer, paint, fumigants. Responsible exporters request food-grade boxes, line walls with craft or barrier, lay desiccants by the pallet, and log humidity with data loggers. The opposite happens too. Coffee sits in a general container through a tropical port, bakes by day, sweats by night. Moisture swings wake mold. If the ship delays, the container becomes a sauna. You can't smell it at the dock. A chromatogram will. Fumigation is an invisible fork. Some ports demand treatments to control pests. A good operator keeps coffee out of the gas path or uses approved methods with full aeration. A sloppy one leaves residues that Europe screens while others don't. That's where same lot, different port stories begin. Antwerp holds, Houston waves through. Europe asks for the treatment certificate and arrival tests. Looser buyers accept a stamp. At arrival, the strict gate opens the bags with a plan. Samples pull from top, middle, bottom, and multiple sacks. OTA, pesticide residues, solvent screens for Decaf, and sometimes Furan and metals get tested. Retail codes often add lower internal limits than law. A lot that's legal can still fail a promise and never see a shelf. In a softer market, that same lot blends into a massive run and dilutes on paper. Compliant by average is a sentence that moves risk from a contract to your kitchen. Roasters meet the bean next, and their plant can either preserve clean work or add noise. Intake silos pull city dust if ducting leaks. Old cooling trays flake metal. Flavoring drums coat beans with glycols. The input grade determines what else rides along. Instant lines dose defoamers and carriers, purity and removal matter. A clean roaster keeps green and roasted paths sealed, logs maintenance, and tracks aids and additives like ingredients with specs. An ornamental one wipes counters and posts photos, packaging locks decisions in place. Whole beans in valved bags after a controlled rest let volatile furan compounds leave the building. Grinding too soon, filling cans or capsules without enough purge, or sealing bricks tight traps them. Headspace oxygen numbers, leak rates, and degassing windows decide whether the first cup is a chemistry puff. Some brands publish those numbers, many don't. Brew is your last lever. Paper filters catch diterpenes, metal lets them through. Grind, time, and temperature tilt chlorogenic acid metabolites from balanced to biting. Cold brew filtered through paper carries fewer oils than a mesh-only batch. Water minerals buffer perception and enamel stress. You can't fix pesticides at home, but you can change oils and acids in the cup. Thread one micro-story. A gasket you never see changed a lab number. A small mill swapped a leaking seal on a depulper with a hardware store fix meant for machinery, not food. Traces of industrial solvent turned up in a buyer audit. The lot didn't taste off. The buyer held the container. The mill ate the lesson, switched to food-grade kits, and started saving invoices to prove it. One gasket, two fates, pass or pay. So how does it sneak in? One decision at a time, on a hillside, under a roof, inside a drum, behind a lid. The fix is the same. Test, document, and choose the boring step that keeps the number low before it meets your cup. Health stakes, real risks, real levers. Let's talk bodies, not lab benches. Think about what shows up in you after years of small sips. Start with the heat-formed pair we met earlier. Acrylamide and furan aren't horror movie poisons, they're population-level trims. Acrylamide forms in roasting and carries a carcinogenic concern posture. The EU pushed mitigation and benchmarks because shaving exposure across millions matters. Furan and its methyl cousins collect in sealed, freshly ground formats and blow off when you crack the pack. Europe nudged engineers to vent and rest. The risk isn't one cup, it's the drift line across decades. Your lever. Choose rested whole beans, valved bags, and paper-filtered brews more often. Ochratoxin A rides slowness. OTA links to kidney risk in animals and is monitored tightly in Europe for a reason. It survives roasting. The personal angle is simple. If your coffee passes EU screens, you're less likely to play toxin roulette. You can't fix OTA at home, but you can favor importers who test lots and show arrival numbers. That trims a tail you can't taste. Pesticides are the quiet background. At legal levels, they won't knock you over. But chronic low-dose exposure isn't inert, especially around neurodevelopment and endocrine noise. Chlorpyrifos became the emblem because of kids' brains. Europe drove near-zero limits for revoked actives and caught lots that would have blended elsewhere. Your move is boring and strong. Ask for multi-residue reports by lot and pick EU-facing suppliers, especially if you're brewing daily. Metals don't negotiate. Lead has no safe level. Cadmium accumulates over a lifetime, hitting kidneys and bones later than you expect. You won't detect either by taste or smell. Europe's maximum levels and retailer codes force mills to replace painted steel, control dust, and screen origins. In looser markets, contamination slides through because nothing stopped it. Your shield is brands that publish lead and cadmium data, not just we test. Diterpenes are the rare lever you feel within weeks. Cafestol and Kahweol elevate LDL in habitual unfiltered coffee drinkers. The fix is almost embarrassingly effective. Paper filters most days. Keep your French press, mocha, or metal cone as a treat. If espresso is your default, watch volume and consider paper inserts. You'll see the change on your lipid panel before your next physical. Decaf solvents are about sealings and controls. MC and EA decaf can be clean when plants prove purge and purity. Co2 largely dodges the residue conversation altogether. Europe's audits cover worker air monitors and mg/kg limits on beans, then recheck on arrival. If you drink decaf daily, pick methods and brands that publish residual thresholds and third-party certificates. That converts faith into math. Here's the through line. None of these exposures alone turns a life. Together, over years, they write risk in pencil you can't see until it's ink. The flip side is power. 5 habits: EU-compliant sourcing, paper filters, rested whole beans with valves, audited decaf methods, and process transparency on additives. Cut multiple lines at once. It's not paranoia, it's housekeeping for your ritual. One nurse, one co-op, one gasket. Those micro-stories weren't decoration. Their proof details move numbers. Tomorrow morning, your safest cup isn't more expensive. It's better documented and better filtered. Your playbook, 5 habits for safer coffee. You don't need a lab to drink smarter. You need 5 habits that make invisible risks boringly small. Start with where you buy. Favor EU-compliant supply chains, importers and roasters who already sell into European retailers. They've built their paperwork life around near-zero pesticide residues, OTA caps, heavy metal screens, solvent specs, and packaging audits. Look for lot-based COAs, not just brand promises. If a product page links to multi-residue, OTA, and metals reports for the specific lot you're buying, that's a grown-up. If you see "we test" with no numbers, ask. The good ones will reply with PDFs. The better ones already posted them. Second habit, paper-filtered brews most days. Cafestol and Kahweol ride oils, paper catches most of it. Keep your press, mocha, or metal cone as a weekend treat. If espresso is your ritual, lower volume and consider paper inserts that tuck into the basket. They drop diterpenes without killing the shot. For immersion methods, don't squeeze the filter at the end. That wrings out the harsh tail. You'll feel the difference in your mouth now and see it in your LDL later. Third, decaf with a spec, not a slogan. Co2 is clean and dodges solvent residue, so choose it when the price fits. If you buy EA decaf, look for fermentation-derived EA in a closed-loop system, pharma-grade solvent inputs, and published residual targets on finished beans. For MC, demand recent third-party tests at sensitive detection limits and audit language that covers purge validation and worker air monitoring. If a brand says sugarcane and stops there, push for numbers. Plants that supply Europe can produce chromatograms on request. Make that your bar. Fourth, lower furan and its methyl cousins with thyme and valves. Whole beans in valved bags that rested before packaging let volatiles leave the building, especially if the roaster publishes their rest window, 24-72 hours post-roast before grinding and packing. For ground coffee, pick smaller packs with shorter shelf lives and evidence of pre-seal venting. Capsule fans, look for headspace oxygen specs, leak rates, and degassing times from makers who treat packaging like an instrument, not a marketing line. Freshness lock is a phrase. 1% O2 headspace at pack with 30-minute N2 purge and inline leak detection at 10.6 mbar/L/S is control. Fifth, put additives and aids on a leash. If you drink instant or ready to drink, choose brands that publish their processing aid policies. USB-grade glycols, food-grade silica with heavy metal limits, PDMS defoamer dosing and removal validation, and migration testing for packaging. Flavored beans, ask about the carrier, propylene glycol or triacetin, and demand USB-grade plus packaging migration tests. If the answer is a vibe word, not a spec, move on. A few extras pull weight for comfort and teeth. If bright cups bite back, brew at 92-94 degrees C, grind a notch coarser and shorten contact time. Paper filters and gentle drawdowns reduce quinic aspirin notes. Rinse your mouth with water after long sips. Enamel cares about exposure time. Dial your water minerals so you're not brewing with corrosive ultra-soft water or chalky soup. Balanced bicarbonate tames perception without flattening the cup. On sourcing, read between the label lines. EU compliant, retailer audited, lot level OTA and metals testing, MRL screens for EU revoked actives, decaf residuals verified on arrival. These phrases mean someone upstream fought the quiet fights you can't. Certifications help, but COAs beat logos. If a roaster publishes annual testing summaries, detection rates, actives screened, failure counts, corrective actions, you've found a house that treats risk like maintenance, not marketing. Packaging and storage at home carry the baton. Keep whole beans in the original valved bag, zipped or clipped in a cool, dark cabinet. No freezers that cycle moisture, no sunny counters that bake oils. Grind right before brewing. If you must pre-grind, use smaller bags and finish them fast. Capsules live best away from heat. Avoid bulk buys that sit months on a shelf. For those who buy by origin, be metals aware without being paranoid. If a brand celebrates volcanic belts and says nothing about cadmium, ask. Responsible importers screen those microregions and rebalance blends when trends run high. They'll talk soil pH management and fertilizer choices because those details move numbers. If they stare at you digitally, that's the answer. Put it all together with a simple routine. Source from EU-facing suppliers with posted COAs. Brew through paper on most days. Save metal for moments. Choose Co2 decaf first. Audited EA next. MC only with strong residual data. Prefer rested, valved whole beans. Pick capsule makers who publish pack specs. Demand disclosure on processing aids and packaging migration. It's not fussy. It's a checklist you can run in a minute that lowers pesticides you can't taste, trims metals you can't see, softens acids you can feel, and keeps ghosts like solvents and furan derivatives out of your first sip. The ritual stays the same. The paperwork behind it gets sharper. Your daily ritual runs on quiet chemistry, and the choices you make turn the dial. Pick EU-facing supply chains, brew through paper most days, favor rested, valved whole beans, and demand specs on decaf and additives. Small, boring steps erase years of invisible exposure. Want the border truth behind EU-compliant? Watch our deep dive on how containers get held or waved through in Antwerp versus Houston. Subscribe for more untold coffee stories and join the email list to get real test reports before you buy. Your next cup can be cleaner by tomorrow morning.